Several weeks ago, I had the privilege of speaking here for the first time, and we talked about the thief on the cross. We talked about the perspective of the crucifixion from the thief on the cross, on that side. And you saw what was playing out beside him. Today we want to talk about the crucifixion again. This time we want to talk about it from the perspective from the foot of the cross. The people that were gathered around, those who witnessed the arrest, the trial, the torture, and the crucifixion of Jesus. And the meaning of all that, and what that has to do with us. But first we have to set the story. We have to set the stage. It was a Thursday evening. Not too different from other Thursdays, except this was the weekend of the Passover. And so in Jerusalem, there were thousands of people who were there. And they had come from all over the place to be there for the Passover. The Passover was falling close to the Sabbath here. So Jesus had met with his disciples. And they had dinner. They shared the Last Supper. And then Jesus said, hey, let's go out here to the garden. And I'm going to take 3 guys who are the closest to me. We're going to go out to the garden and I'm going to pray because I know what's going to happen. Judas had already gotten up and left. Jesus knew the significance of that. The others didn't. They just said, he's going someplace. He went out to the garden. He begins to pray. And he says, Lord, if there's any way, Father, that we can just skip all this, then let's find that way. But if not, your will be done. We'll do it. I'll do it. And he's out there and he prays and he comes back and he sees that those who are closest to him are asleep. Of all things, this is the night of the betrayal, the day before the crucifixion. And those closest to me are asleep. Goes back and he prays again. Comes back to the same thing. And he does it a 3rd time. And he finally tells them, get up, get up. It's time. It's happening. And the guards are coming from a distance. It's dark. They come and they pull out their swords. And one of them, and Peter then, he wakes up and he says, well, I'm going to put a stop to this. This isn't right. Takes out his sword and cuts off the ear of Malchus, one of the servants. Jesus says, no. May appreciate the effort, may not, but you don't have a clue what you're doing. Jesus picks up the ear and puts it back on. Very impressive. You think maybe they leave him alone? No. The die is cast. It's set. They had been trying Jesus for weeks and months, just not officially. They knew what they were going to do. So they gathered them together. They got the soldiers, the Jewish soldiers, and they said, no, we're going to take you in. So they take him into town, take him into Jerusalem, where Jesus has 2 trials, essentially. He has an ecclesiastical, a church trial before the Jews. And he has a civil trial before the Romans. Each one of those consists of 3 parts. There aren't many with him right now. In fact, there's nobody. None of the ones that were the closest to him. The 12, the 3, they're gone. They're probably in the background. We know Peter is. They're back there someplace. And so first they go to Annas. And Annas had been the high priest. Used to be. He was an older guy. Not as old as he used to be when I first read this. When I first read this, he was an old guy of 70. Now he's approaching middle age. Well, whatever he is, he was well respected by the Jews. He had been deposed as high priest by the Romans several years earlier. But he was still probably thought of as the high priest. He was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest. So the Jews take him over here to Annas. And Annas asks him a few questions. Who are you? What are you doing here? All this kind of stuff. He doesn't ask for defense. This is a rehearsed trial. And so he says, all right, I'll send you off. So he sends him off to Caiaphas. Well, Caiaphas is the actual high priest. Now, this is big time. Remember, this whole thing started just shortly after midnight when he is captured. and taken into Annas. We're between midnight and 5:30 on what will be Thursday night or very early Friday morning. So he takes him down to Caiaphas. It's not going to work. Takes him to Caiaphas. Caiaphas is the actual high priest. And there's a small group of the Sanhedrin around there. Informal group. So they begin to ask Jesus questions again. Now this is all rehearsed. They know what they're going to do. Their mind is made up. They're just talking, seeing what they can get. The Pharisees and the Sadducees had disagreed. There was never a clear statement of the charges. He's going to destroy the temple. He's going to be a king. He wants to depose Caesar. It's different things. Everybody was saying something different. Jesus made a statement and sort of challenging what Caiaphas had to say. One of the soldiers beat him, punched him, hit him. The soldier's not rebuked. You don't beat up the defendant in a trial. No, they did. They didn't think much about it. There was no justice to be had for Jesus. Jesus wouldn't speak. So finally, probably out of frustration as much as anything, Caiaphas looked at Jesus and said, in the King James, I like it, he says, I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ. Jesus says, yeah. What more do we need? He just admitted he is the Son of God. That is blasphemy. This man here, born in Bethlehem, or from Judea, from Nazareth, cannot be the Son of God. It's blasphemy. He should die. Problem is, the Jews can't kill anybody, can't execute anybody. Romans won't let them do it. So now, they've had an appearance before Annas, an appearance before Caiaphas and a small group of the Sanhedrin. So now, the third trial, they take him before the formal Sanhedrin, still in the nighttime. It's a cursory trial. And they're just saying pretty much the same thing, going by the script, all set. They say, all right, let's beat him and let's take him off to Pilate. That's where we can get some action. So they say, fine. They gather them all up. And now, about 5:30 in the morning, I never knew any judge that met at 5:30 in the morning. Pilate, however, came out 5:30 in the morning. Pilate was not a friend of the Jews. He did not want to be where he was. He lived in Caesarea, but he was down in Jerusalem that day because this is the weekend of the Passover. And so this is a big deal. It's a big time, and if you're a politician, you make an appearance. You go to the parades. It's just what you do. And so Pilate shows up here this weekend while he lives somewhere down the road. He was corrupt, pleasure-loving, driven by political concerns, not particularly concerned with justice, and certainly not for the Jews. Now, he was appointed there by the Romans. He was a Roman. Jerusalem is a long way from Rome. That was not the plum position. If you were going to be high in the Roman Empire, you wanted to be in Rome. And the further you got away from Rome, the less significant you were. And Jerusalem was about as far as you could get. So Pilate's not happy. He doesn't like the Jews. He wants them to go away. He doesn't want to be there. And now 5:30 in the morning, they bring this guy in, and they say, all right. He says, all right. What's he done? What's his crime? Oh, and the big crime. You can put it up. Put it up above him, and they announced it. They put it on the billboards. Pilate, he is an evildoer. You know, we have a thing in this country that you can't be charged like that. All right, he's on first-degree evildoing. You have to be specific in what you charge. And they did too. But that's all they had. So they come to Pilate and say, he's an evildoer. Well, Pilate talks to him. Can't get much out of him. Doesn't want to mess with him. He asks him, he says, all right, are you a king? He says, well, my kingdom's not of this world. I'm a spiritual king. He says, I come for truth. And Pilate then starts to get disgusted. He says, what is truth? So, doesn't know what to do. And then he learns that Jesus is from Galilee. That's where his domicile was, where he lived when he wasn't out on the road. And so he says, I remember Herod is the ruler of Galilee and would have more direct jurisdiction over him. And as fate would have it, Herod's in town this weekend too. All the politicians come to the parade. So he said, I'm going to send him over to Herod. So they gather him up and they send Jesus to the second trial, the second civil trial, Roman trial, to Herod. Well, Herod and Pilate didn't get along until after this day, and then they did. But Herod was kind of interested in this because he had wanted to meet Jesus for a long time, but just never had the opportunity. He had heard that this Jesus went around doing magic tricks, this and that and other things, and so he wanted to see one of those things. So he tried to get, it was a plaything for Herod, and so he wanted Jesus to do one of these tricks, one of these miracles for him. Jesus did not accommodate him. Jesus was silent. So Herod took a white robe, tied him up, put the manacles on him, sent him back to Pilate. I don't want to mess with him. Pilate didn't want to mess with him. Herod didn't want to mess with him. They didn't get along until after this day. Herod sends him back to Pilate. Can you imagine the frustration of the Jews? We've got him. He's in our hands. We can't kill him, even though he's an evildoer. We've got to get the Roman sanction. So they send him back to Pilate. Who doesn't want this to happen? And Pilate wants to release him. Now remember, the wild card in all of this. Pilate is catching flack from his wife. Because his wife said, I had a bad dream. Don't mess with this guy. This guy is trouble. If you do something to kill this guy, bad things are going to happen to us. Pilate said, if I do, then bad things are going to happen to me for sure. So he doesn't know what to do. He says, aha, I know what to do. It's the Passover. It's our custom that we release a really bad guy to you instead of somebody else. Well, we release some criminal to you on Passover, just as a show of goodwill. So he says, hey, there's a guy named Barabbas who is a murderer. Now, he's a lot more than just an evildoer. He's a murderer. And I sometimes wonder about Pilate's logic in all this. It's after 5:30, but not much. And the Jews had brought Jesus before him. And if they didn't want him to be killed, they wouldn't have done that. Why would they have brought someone to Pilate that they wanted released? They simply wouldn't have brought him. And Pilate knew that. So he says, hey, I'll release Jesus to you. And I got that. I'll release Jesus to you. And they said, no, we want Barabbas. The Jews said, we want Barabbas. And Pilate was confused. And he talked to him again. Went back and talked to Jesus again. And he came back out and he says, I don't see anything wrong with this guy. I'm going to release him. And he says, no. Give us Barabbas. We want the murderer instead of the evildoer. Pilate is concerned. So Pilate brings his big wash basin in, dips his hands in it, says, I'm done. If you want to kill him, I'm not going to stop you. Go kill him. But the blood is on you. Amazing. The Jews say, the blood be on us and on our children. We don't care. This is right. Pilate says, I'm done. So he hands Jesus over to the Jews with the Roman sanction. That's all they wanted. There's Pilate's signature at the bottom of the line, on the dotted line, saying that it's okay to go out and kill him. Before Pilate released him, though, he said, I'm going to beat him. I'm going to do what's called the scourging, which was called the terrible preface. It was something that was not done to a Roman. It was something that only occurred in the colonies, way out in Judea or any of the other non-Roman places. Only place this ever occurred. And it was an event where they would take the condemned and they would put him on his knees. They would strip him. They would put him on his knees. They would take his arms and tie him up on a post. Then they would take lashes on the end of a handle with lashes on the end of it. And at the end of those leather strips, they would have fragments of bone, pieces of metal, and for a while, they would take this whip and would thrash it against the back of the accused. And that was what Pilate had done with Jesus, thinking that if we imposed the terrible preface, the horrible preface on Jesus, they will let him go. They won't want to kill him. And they did that. Sometimes the beating was so secure that the person died. They couldn't survive this thing being beaten over and over and over again on the back with bone fragments and metal chips. But that's what they did to Jesus. And Jesus, while incredibly weakened, still would know. His 12 were not there. Peter had already denied him. He had already looked over at Peter when the rooster crowed 3 times. John wasn't there. James wasn't there. We have an account in the Gospel of Mark where there was a young man who fled naked when he thought he was going to be accused, and that's probably Mark. They were all gone. They were all gone. And he was there being beaten with this whip. Well, they got done with that, they put a purple robe on him. They said, all right, you say you're king. All right, you're king. Put this purple robe on you. Then we're going to make this down as a thorn crowns. We got it there. This thing's sharp. They put it on his head, they pushed it down. They spit in his face. They took a stick. They beat him with it. Then he gave him the stick. They said, hey, you hold this up. Now that your back is bloody raw, you've got a purple robe on, you've got this crown of thorns on your head, and now you've got your scepter. Boy, you really do look like a king. And nobody was there to defend him. Nobody. He wanted to release Jesus. The Jews said Caesar is king. Not Jesus. He says he's a king, but he's not a king. Caesar is king. Well, that was a lie. They wanted the Messiah to come and free them from Caesar. But they'll say anything they have to say to kill this man now. Pilate washed his hands. He was taken away. About 9 o'clock. It was a custom that to go to your crucifixion, you had to carry your cross. Well, he had that terrible preface. He couldn't carry his cross. He tried and collapsed. So they grabbed the guy out of the crowd, which you were allowed to do. Simon of Cyrene. And they said, hey, Simon, you carry the cross for him. So Simon put the beam on his shoulder, carried it out to this place called the place of the skull. His hands and feet were nailed. Probably with something like a railroad spike. Through the wrist, through the ankle. Big thing. Put him on the beam. Plopped it down into the ground. Thought it would hurt there, but not like it was going to. Still, nobody there. Where is everybody? Nobody's there. Oh, the Bob is there. He looks out. He knows some of the women are there. His mother, a couple of the women, but not the 12. Not the big group of people who, remember 5 days earlier, brought him into the city on what we know as Palm Sunday. And he came in, Hosanna, hail to you, you're on the throne, you're the king. And these same guys who were killing him on Sunday said, look, the world is not after it. But in 5 days it all changed. Now he's plopped down in the ground, waiting to die. We all know it was a terrible death. You couldn't breathe, that in terrible, intolerable thirst. Some people would hang there for days. Fortunately for Jesus, he was only going to be there for a few hours. But the result was the same. The pain was still the same. And now this is where it gets really moving. The thief, the one thief had said, "Remember me." The other thief was still upset. But Jesus looks out and he says, "John, take care of my mom." In all of this, he remembers to, I guess John was the only one there, he remembers to take care of his mother. He's feeling tremendous loss and separation from God because he is bearing all the sin. Sins that we're going to yet commit today and tomorrow and forever. And all of our sins before and all world sin. He had it all, and God cannot come in contact with sin. Great gulf between God and sin. And so he says, "Father, why have you forsaken me?" He knew why. But the intense pain from all of that was almost unbearable. He had the physical pain and he had the sense of loss, and yet still, where was everybody? And then he said, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." They sure seemed to know what they were doing. If you talk about premeditation, you've got premeditation here. They've been plotting it for months. And they carefully calculated how to pick him up on Thursday night with Judas. And then they took him. They got the Jews, got all their ducks in a row with the Jewish leaders. Then they took him to Pilate. And they said, no, we want this guy and not Barabbas. And then they took him out, and here he was. And yet he said, "Father, forgive them." And then he died. We're at the foot of the cross. There's a lot of lessons that we can learn at the foot of the cross. But the one we want to mention today and emblazon on us is that we have continuous, unlimited forgiveness. When we're here in the group, we can nod and go, "Yeah, that's right, that's right." That's not what I'm concerned about today, because I don't think we're any different from the 12 or from the groups that had followed Jesus. What better display of courage could Peter have shown when they came to Jesus and they said, "Hey, we're going to take you. Judas just betrayed me with a kiss." And Peter pulls out his sword and slices off his ear. "Nah, we're going to make a big stand here for you." Yet, it was just a couple of hours later that Peter said, "I don't have any idea who he is." When he was there with the group, he was strong. He was ready to go. But when he was off by himself, not so much. Not quite as bold as what he had been before. That's the times that I'm worried about. We need to know. We need to really, really know that whatever we have done, whatever we will yet do, that is not good. It is no worse than what Peter did in his denial. It is no worse than what the 12 did in abandoning Jesus and maybe watching from the shadows way back, but not saying anything. No worse than taking the whip with the bone and the metal fragments and beating Jesus on his back. No worse than killing Jesus. Literally killing Jesus. No worse than what Paul did in killing Christians. But they came back. They came back from that. Our enemy is not the sin. It is. But the real thing that will get us is the discouragement that we feel after my sin. I was a whole lot smarter several years ago when in my own church I would sit over here. Actually, sat back. Then you could sit back from the back then, get away with it. So most churches you can't do that anymore. With kids, sit up here. And I was a whole lot smarter then than what I am now. Because the only thing I really lacked was I had a globe in my bedroom, and I should have put a little tail on the end of that globe. And then I could have grabbed that tail and I said, I got the world by the tail. Because that's how you feel. My goodness, you are never more invincible than you are when you're in your teens and early 20s. What in the world is going to get you? Nothing's going to get you. You have these ideals, and you have this motivation, and you have this drive and stamina and strength that nobody else has. And so, yeah, everybody else might get discouraged, but not me. That's exactly what Peter said. That is exactly what Peter said. Not me, Lord. I will never deny you. You will. You just pure and simply will. You will make mistakes. You will feel fallen away. I challenge anybody who has been a believer for any length of time to say, I have never felt like I have fallen away. There are times, not saying that you did, but you have that feeling, that discouragement. You will feel isolated in your guilt. Everyone will feel that way. It's great that we can meet together, but sometimes we will have someone who is hurting in here who says, I don't feel that closeness to God that this guy's singing so loudly about, or this guy's praying so fervently about. What's the matter with me? The view from the cross, from the foot of the cross is, I want you to know, my child, Jesus says, that you are a sinner. You are going to mess up. But when you do, don't get so discouraged that you stop believing. That's the risk. When if we have a fellowship with Jesus, and we begin to see and to feed on our weakness and our sinfulness, then we can say, God doesn't love me anymore. He can't love me anymore. Look what I've done. That's why I think at the foot of the cross, Jesus can tell us, you've done nothing any worse than what Peter did, and he was with me. He was my number one guy. James and John thought they were. Peter may have thought he was. Whoever they were with me. And I love John. And you're not as bad as them. You're not worse than them. And one of the first things he did, one of the last things he did before the resurrection, was to find Peter and say, Peter, do you love me? Yes, Lord, I love you. Peter, do you love me? Yes, Lord, I love you. No, Peter, do you love me? Yes, Lord, you know I do. Then feed my sheep. 3 times he had denied Jesus. 3 times he reaffirmed his love. He was back. Paul wished he could do better. Oh, in King James, I love it there. It says, the good I would, I cannot do. I wish I could be so much better, but I can't. But that's all right. And he boldly went forth. He did not get so discouraged that he quit believing. We will get discouraged. We will get depressed. But at the foot of the cross, we see that Jesus forgives us for everything we've done and will do. The point of the whole thing is this. Jesus wants our hearts, not our perfection. Boy, stick that in your left ventricle someplace and keep it there. Jesus wants our hearts, not our perfection. That's why he died on the cross, to make us perfect. But there's nothing that he can do to make us give him our hearts. That's up to us. So, we stay on the side of Jesus. I want to serve you. I do. But forgive my unbelief. And when you're alone, and when you're isolated, and when you suddenly realize that you're not invincible, that's when you look up at the cross and say, love me, Lord. Thank you for forgiveness. My heart is yours. Your sacrifice cleanses my sin. Don't ever quit growing, but don't quit believing because of weakness and sin. He wants us to be better and more complete and more in tune with him. And that's hopefully what happens throughout the years. But our sinfulness still occurs. The cross, the foot of the cross, as we look up, we see the forgiveness. I appreciated the reading a moment ago, and I want to conclude with that because this is what we need to keep in our hearts and minds. It's Romans 8, 31 to 36, 39. What then shall we say in response to this? If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things? Who will bring any charge against those whom God has chosen? It is God who justifies. Who is it that condemns? Christ Jesus, who died, more than that, who was raised to life, is at the right hand of God and is also interceding for us. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall trouble, hardship, persecution, famine, nakedness, or danger or sword? As it's written, for your sake we face death all day long. We are considered as sheep to be slaughtered. No. In all of these things, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus, our Lord. From the foot of the cross, we learn that to be true. We are not perfect. We will make mistakes. We may make terrible mistakes. But remember those who killed physically Jesus could come back. And so can we. When those times occur, don't forget, the cross is where I find peace. If you're not a member of the body of Jesus or need prayers in your congregation, come now.